Hi, and welcome back to Live and Breathe Horses. And we're going on with this wonderful book, More Than a Horseman, with stories collected by Margaret Dorrance and John St. Ryan, all about Tom. And we are today on the final part of an amazing collection of stories from Bryan Neubert. He explained, this is the difference between a drilling process and a learning process. If you ride one long enough, you might eventually season them enough to get them straight, but this way you can get it on a real green one. I know Tom got a lot of help from his brother Fred and his friend Clifford Wade, but after seeing many of the things I saw him do, I remember thinking many times, if ever I was in the presence of genius, this is it. There was a horse when I was at Cain Sabby over there in Hollister, and I told Tom that I had trouble catching this horse. He was in with 10 or 15 others that we were using, and he was just hard to catch for me. And so Tom said, would you like for me to meet you there, or do you want to bring him here? That's when Tom was at Ranna Creek, and I said, well, my folks live right in the middle. Well, Tom said, that would be a good idea. Let's do that, 'cause she's got corrals there and everything we need. So we put him in a corral and turned him loose. It wasn't a very big corral, but it was so if he went by us, we could kind of rush in on him a little bit and kind of throw a pebble at him or something and scoot him on by. And pretty soon he found out that if we rushed him a little bit as he was coming by us, it was turning into work. He was getting a little puffy, and then he set himself up to be caught. And so then we would leave him, come back and start over till he got set up to be caught. If he tried to evade us, we would move right in there on him till it shaped up. Then we put him off in a bigger lot, and we did the same thing until we could pet him and scratch him, till, as Tom put it, he's getting so that where we are is where he wants to be. He called it true unity. We tempted him to trot off, but he didn't. Then he got so I could scratch him on the neck, then on the shoulder, withers, and then on his back, then on his hip, and then across from left hip to right hip. And to start with, he'd have to move, then finally, so he would stand for me to go to the left hip, to the right hip, to the left hip, back and forth, and his feet wouldn't move. And Tom seemed to be well pleased with how it shaped up. The next morning, when I went to catch that horse, I noticed he was watching me when I came from the house to the barn, and when I came out of the barn with my halter. He left the other horses and met me at the gate. I couldn't wait to get to a phone to tell Tom what had happened. Tom's reaction was kind of like, huh? I said, you don't seem too surprised. Tom said, I would have been surprised if you would have had any other outcome. I tried to bring out what I'd started to learn that Sunday afternoon on a video I called Wild Horse Handling. On the subject of catching horses, there was a woman over there at one of Tom's clinics. Tom had asked if anyone had anything they wanted to work on, any problems. One woman said she had one horse that's hard to catch, and Tom said, why don't you put him in the corral here and let's have a look? She said, well, I don't have him here. And Tom said, well, how about if you get him? And she said, That wouldn't work out because he's 50 miles away and I'd have to borrow a trailer. Tom said, "Let me ask you this. Do you only catch him when you're going to ride him?" She said yes. And he said, "Okay, any other questions?" He talked about that quite a bit after, and I got to thinking about it. Why would a horse want to be caught if he knew he was going to have to go to work every time he gets caught? Tom rode a horse named Ringo at that ranch where we were working together. He rode him kind of steady like. The way we worked there, we didn't wrangle those horses in the open, we bunched them up. Tom would catch me a colt, bring it to me right out in the open, and we'd saddle them up. Some of them wanted to buck a little. Some of them he caught by hind foot, so they would stay put for me to put the saddle on. Then Tom would have me turn them loose. Some would buck around there when they were real green. Then they'd line out and run with those other colts until they were smoothed out, and he would catch them again. He had them all broke to catch and made a pretty good project out of it. We had 19 head of colts and we just rode around without any corrals to catch them in. That way, we didn't have to feed them any hay. When Tom first came there, we didn't even feed. One day, we were wrangling, but Tom was on something else, so Ringo was part of the group. Early in the morning, those horses heard us talking because they came off the steep hill, just kind of floated off the steep hill. And Tom said, "Oh, look, look, look." I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what he was looking at. And Tom said, "Look at Ringo." And I didn't notice anything special about Ringo. And then Tom said, "That's the best he's ever come off the hill when we've wrangled since I've been here." I said, "Tom, you might ride him an hour a day. That's 1 out of 24 hours in a day, and he would adopt what you've shown him when he's free that way." And Tom said, "Oh, yes, positively. He likes it that much." That seemed amazing to me. There was a blue roan horse I was riding. Tom had me circle around him on the edge of those other horses. He would kind of flip his head when we came round to those other horses. And Tom said, "Can you see anything that's happening just before he flips his head like that?" And it was pretty irritating when he would do that. I said, "Not that I can think of." And he said, "Just take him around there again and try that again." Of course, every time he had me circle this horse, he would flip his head down like that. I just couldn't figure out what Tom was trying to get me to see. Probably went around there 4 or 5 times and he said, "Okay now, this is what I want you to see." I couldn't figure it out, so he just told me. He said, "What he's doing is reducing the speed in his feet just before he drops his head that way. Think about it ahead of time. Keep thinking on his feet. Keep an even pace in his feet and see what happens in his head." When I did, it smoothed right out. There was a pretty good lesson. Years later, I had sort of forgot about it. But Bill Van Norman said Tom was up there and helped him when he had a mare that did the same. She would just duck her head and flip her head like mine. He pretty much had the same story as I did, with the same outcome with Tom's help. One place I worked at, this horse was on the buck quite a bit. When I came there, he was just like a yearling colt. Another guy was there that had him broke to lead. when they were weaners that year before. He said, "There is one in the bunch that I could never get through to. He's a tough, tough guy." When they were 2-year-olds, I started him, and I didn't have any doubt which one he was talking about. He was just very difficult for me, and kind of a hard-minded horse, always wanting to buck, and if you walked behind him in the barn, he would try to kick you. Everybody was tuned up on him. He was not safe to walk behind. When I reached for the cinch, if I wasn't just real careful, he would try to kick me in the arm when I took the cinch. I kind of watched him very carefully. I never got kicked, but he did take a swipe at me all the time. We used him quite a bit, but he didn't seem to get any better. I showed him to Tom, and he said, "Let's see if you can scratch him on the belly." I could scratch him where the cinch went, but if I went any further back, he would kick at me. He really was terrible to kick, just miserable. Everything was terrible with him. We called him Snake Bit because he had a bit on the end of the nose by a snake. Because he got bit on the end of the nose by a snake. Anyway, Tom had me scratch him where he could tolerate it, then take my hand kind of fast and work it back there towards his flanks, maybe just 5 or 6 inches, and then back again before he would kick, right where the cinch goes. We probably spent 15 minutes there, and we got him where you could just scratch him anywhere, and he didn't show any emotion, but he quit kicking, and I told Tom I was going to keep up with that pretty good after he left. I would catch him every day and scratch him the whole length of his belly, and he didn't try to kick me, so I just did that every day. 10 days like that, and then he was crazy to have his belly scratched. Instead of being hard to catch, he became kind of a pest. When you'd go to catch another horse, he would just cut you off. I would scratch him on the belly and tail, and he just became a pet. He got to where, when I turned the other horses loose to run out, he would follow me back to the barn, and I would scratch him some more. That really changed his life. Horses that were in a shell that way, I kind of got to scratching on them, even if they didn't show any enjoyment. Tom especially helped me with the wild horses. That was such a big help. One time, when I was at Tom's house, and I see where he had 11 clinics lined up on the calendar there, I mentioned it to him, and he said, "Well, when you're my age, just because it's on the calendar there, it doesn't mean you're going to be there." I said, "How do you like those clinics?" And he said, "It reminds me of the neighbours' pigs that got out. They burrowed a hole under the fence and kind of had the run of the place, and then they rounded them up and put them back in the pen. Then they put a hot wire on that hole where they went through. That stopped those pigs from coming out, except one, and this one, it might show up in the barn to get those little kernels of grain where a horse was tied. Then it might show up in the shop. But wherever he was, they just put him back in the pen. But he might show up somewhere else much later. They just couldn't figure out how he was getting out. So they decided just to sit and wait and see how he did it. Well, they waited quite a little while, and he wasn't even trying to get out. So about the time when they were getting a little bored, they hear one just squealing, and they see it's the pig that's been escaping, but he's in there with the other pigs, and he's been looking at that hole under the fence. He was just squealing, and then he took a run and ducked under that wire and then just sauntered off. That's kind of the way I am. I think I'm kind of like that pig. I just think about those clinics and start squealing before I even get there. Bill Dorrance told me another story, and it's just like the story I was told about splitting the mare and the colt, only it's in reverse. Bill had the ranch up there after he was married on Mount Toro. He took on lease cows and they were trailing him. There was a cow there that just would not stay with the bunch. She made it very difficult to drive them from one place to the next, and Bill told Tom, "We ought to just rope her when she comes out of the bunch again." And Tom said, "If you wouldn't mind trying something else." Bill said, "Okay," and Tom said, "If she comes out of the bunch, I'll just take her for a trip and then I'll bend her back to the bunch." It was a big open place. It wouldn't work if you had a fence or trees or bush or something close by. It was kind of an open place right up there on top of the mountains. Then Tom says to Bill, "When that cow comes back to the bunch, if you would take her for a circle out the other way and put her back in the bunch. Then, if she goes through, I'll take her for another trip." Finally, this cow found out that she could just rest in with those other cows, and they just let her. It took a little while. Bill said if she would ever work towards the lead when they would go to trail those cattle, they cut her off and took her for a trip. After a while, she got to where if she got up in the lead and you were trotting up along there, she would just duck back into the bunch. Anyway, I have used that since, and it was very valuable. There was a fellow there that had a horse that bucked him off at Ray Hunt's clinic about a year before and brought the horse to Tom's clinic, and it bucked him off at Tom's clinic too. The horse had a little age on him. Tom asked me if I would ride him. Tom then coached me through some pretty neat things and got him going. He'd been in a bucking string, and the fellow just wanted to see if he could get him going just for the challenge. There was a woman there that asked Tom before lunch if he could check her horse out for loading in the 2-horse trailer, and the fellow that owned the bucking horse heard her say that, and could we check his horse out too? I brought the trailer around in front of the barn. Tom had me make an effort to load the bucking horse, and I'd never seen one so closed-minded. I just couldn't even get on the first base. I couldn't get anything going. Tom just kept telling me, "You're doing just fine. Just keep doing what you're doing." I worked there quite a while and never really accomplished much of anything. And Tom said, "Okay, let's have this lady take your horse from you and take it over there by the barn and see if he could eat some grass. Then we'll check out the horse that the lady owns." Well, that horse was kind of an average trailer loading that I've seen many times, and it was in and out many times, while the bucking horse, I couldn't even get it to look in the trailer. We spent 5 or 10 minutes with the second horse, and no problem. Then Tom said, "Would you bring the bucking horse back over? Now, Bryan, don't do anything different than you did the first time and start in again." It wasn't any time at all that I got him looking in the trailer. I got him to put a front foot in and then both front feet, and then he went in and out. On the way home, I said to Tom, What happened there anyway, Tom? Sometimes they need a little break, said Tom. I said, Tom, sometimes you say, let's stay with it, even if we miss our lunch. And another time, with no apparent improvement at all, you say, let's just have a break. Tom just laughed and didn't say a word, because there isn't a straight answer. Like he often says, it all depends. Bill was telling me that Tom and him were there at Tularcitos moving some cattle around. And on the way home, there was a mare and a colt in the water gap. And Bill said, well, she's here. I've been meaning to wean that colt anyway. So they shut the pair in the corral, and Bill said, we might just as well go home and get the truck and come back and get that baby colt and haul him out of here. Leave the mother. And Tom said, well, no, since both of us are getting home, how about if I just stay here? Bill told me when he got back there with the truck, there was this little baby colt standing in one end of the lot and the mare in the other end. When he told me that, I was about 15 years old, but I couldn't understand how anybody could accomplish that. There's no stronger bond with horses than between a mother and its baby. But I had envisioned that somehow he'd made that baby colt separate from its mother. Anyway, they loaded the baby colt up with his gelding and drove off. I thought about that through the years, how in the world he could ever have done that. But later, I kind of found out in Nevada and used it a lot myself. If Tom had two horses to split, he'd just kind of put the heat on them there until they split up, then back the pressure right off. It wouldn't be long before they didn't want anything to do with one another. You can do that while you're on their backs too. Works good. And it's been a real big help to me since then. I went to a clinic there at Lamel, Nevada. Tom had asked for a volunteer to teach a horse to learn to stop without using the reins. I couldn't wait to get my hand up for that one. This horse hadn't been stopping very well, and I thought this would be a good one to work at. Tom had me trot and lope around the arena. He put the other people in the middle, and he said, if the horse tries to close in, just bump him with your inside stirrup a little bit on the elbow and let me fluctuate between a trot and a lope. And I had to make quite a few little turns around here. When he was stopping some, Tom had me take hold of the reins and start to stop him and then turn him loose. When I turned him loose, he wouldn't finish up his stop, and Tom would say, okay, just go right on round again. We might have gone around again 5 or 10 times. Then he said, okay, now just pick up on him and see if he'll finish the stop on his own. I don't know how many times we did that, and when I took hold of him and threw slack in there, he really stopped. We gave him quite a bit of time to air up, and then went around there once more, and he got to where you could pick up on him, and he put quite a bit of effort into the stopping. That was another real valuable lesson. So thank you very much for joining me today, and I will look forward to see you next time.